Well, white up. The Chawa, he whilst Twitieta. Tim Michel is question Sanachin. That's in my language, which is Secwépemc, which is one of the Thompson River, Fraser watershed dialects that's upriver. But Hasquile to Noya, one of the few things I know in Squamish Nation. So I was born in Kamloops. I don't know if you people know where Kamloops is, but that's where I was born. Iana Jackie Gonzalez. She is a Squamish CM, an elder from the Squamish and Musqueam Nation, who hails from the village of Eslahan, who has spent over 45 years leading the way in cultural revitalization for her community, in particular with youth and families in regards to ceremony and protocol. And I just want to raise my hand because I know how Musqueam and Squamish have been leading the charge in terms of maintaining Indigenous cultures in the South. And I just raised my hand to them. Where I'm from, we kept the language, but our ceremonies sort of disappeared. So which one do you want? I think you have to have both. And I think that's what's happening now in both Squamish and Musqueam, is that they've held on to a lot of their ceremonies and that, but now they're really making a big push to maintain their languages. So I'll call Jackie up to do a welcoming to our territory here.
So Hosiam, Chakatok, Shaman, Jackie Gonzalez, on Winoxin, Amalchison, Alcameo, and it's Tanachka, Amalchison, Alcameo, on Winoxin, Squamish. I am really honored to be here again. You know, I love our space, our beautiful gathering house here. Was part of looking at the plans and meeting everybody when it was in its early development, but it took 20 plus years for it to become a reality. So I had a beautiful opportunity to spend time with another group of students who did their presentations on reconciliation, and it was very well. Every single student did an amazing job. So I want to hold my hands up to them for those that are here. I am a matriarch of my family, you know. I never thought I'd get to that age where I would have to begin guiding and directing my daughters, my nieces, my nephews on following our cultural ways of being. And they are so beautiful. You know, I love our culture. It provides healing, it provides warmth, the foundation is so strong in terms of who we are and where we come from. And you know, in today's day and age, we hardly ever get to know all of our family. And I know for some it's very difficult because your family could be on the other side of the world. But that doesn't diminish who you are. You hold on to that. and you keep it close to your heart, because that's gonna carry you on in your life and build those foundational steps to helping you go forward in a good way. So, welcome to our beautiful territory here on our Squamish, our Tsleil-Waututh, our Musqueam, our Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Sumas, like all of our coastal territories. And you know, when you come from our country, we have relatives everywhere. So we can't travel anywhere without running into a relative. So I was checking in with Gary. Is that your brother? He's been happily married to my dear relative for over 40 years.
Well, it's about 35.
35. And she is a strong Squamish cultural woman who knows our language, who is on council, who's helped with governments, and their daughter is in the science medical field now out at UBC. So, you know, you never know what's going to unfold in your life. All of a sudden a path is going to be there and you're gonna go with it because it's gonna feel right in here. So my hands are off to you. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy lives, and I look forward to your work today. Aishka.
Jackie, it's just heartful gratitude to your words. I just want to say that again, I want to reiterate just how important it is to do cultural and language revitalization, and I hold my hands up to Jackie and all the people that are in the Vancouver area that are doing that. In my own family, my father, his brother, my uncle Lawrence, my mother, and two of my sisters are actively involved with the language and cultural revitalization back home. So, and I hold up my hands to them too. And I know Gary is really focused on his own language revitalization in his own life, and I hold up my hands to him too. So, without further ado, I want to introduce Xinying, who most of you should know. And she will do an acknowledgement of the Squamish people and their land. Yui?
Thank you, Jackie, for welcoming us to the land. Thank you. We acknowledge with respect that today's event takes place on the unceded traditional territories of the coastal Salish peoples, including the Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, Squamish, and Musqueam nations. As we gather for this Indigenous Work Experience series, we recognize the enduring presence, knowledge, and contributions of Indigenous peoples whose lands, labor, and the stewardship have sustained these territories since time immemorial. We acknowledge the historical and ongoing impacts of colonialism on Indigenous workers and communities. And we commit to learning from Indigenous perspectives on work and relationships, responsibility, and community well-being.
Thank you, Xinying. Now, since I'm going to be sitting on the panel, I'm going to have to bring Gary in to do the facilitation for the panel presentation. Gary George, I've known him for quite some time. He's been a fixture here at SFU, and I regard him as one of the treasures that we have here.
Thank you, Tim. To get your glasses.
I don't wanna see anything.
Denise, Zakazet, Skyzet, Saisozi, Gary George, Diste, Gramdan, Tlaw, Witsuatin, Snikelia, Koselish, Yinta, Yinta Hanzu, Snikelia, Denise, Timothy Michel, Tsitsen, Brother Brian, and Tsitsen Muspia, Sam, Squamish, sorry, Sam Seaward, apologies. And my name is Gary George. I have worked at SFU since 2008, and welcome all the people. Zakazek, Jackie, Snikelia, Hanuk, Snikelia, Boozy. Thank you for your words, thank you for your speech. It's an honor to be here today, and I'll be facilitating this session. Just some general housekeeping for those of you who might be new. There's some snacks and refreshments out in the hallway. Fresh coffee and snacks and stuff. And the washrooms, there's a little house out in the back. It's got a moon on the door. Just kidding. Just down the hallway, just right here. And I tell students, if you ever have hesitation about going to school, go work in northern BC for a while, get eaten alive by mosquitoes. And it makes things like this look really nice. Anyways, we're going to jump into the session about male perspectives on work experience. And I just quickly want to say my very first job in high school, after I graduated from high school, I worked on the railroad. And it seemed like back then, they didn't care about safety. They didn't even give us earplugs. Didn't give us earplugs, didn't give us safety for our eyes. It was just do the job. Obviously that was, I can actually say the last century. It was in the last century. Things had changed, but back then it seemed like labor was pretty rough on the edges. And that was just one experience out of many. That was the actual job. I am writing memoirs on stuff that I heard. Some of it was, I'll just say, rough on the edges. Anyways, we have our speakers here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to pass the mic to each of the gentlemen, and they're going to respond. And we might have some questions from the audience, because you might hear things that might want to spur you to answer a question or ask a question. So the very first question I'm going to ask is, can you tell us the types of work or jobs you've held throughout your life? Were any of them connected to your community or culture in some way? So there's the microphone. So I encourage you guys to use the mics as you answer the question. So you can start off with Timothy. So once again, can you tell us? Yeah. Can you tell us the types of work, jobs you've held throughout your life? Were any of them connected to your community or culture in some way?
The trouble with this is that, unfortunately, I've lived. Okay. When you've lived a long life and you're never really made up in your mind what you're going to do when you grow up, you end up doing a lot of different things. So when I was, I guess around 10, I got a paper route in Kamloops, and I was a paper boy for a while. Now that's not something that you do much of anymore. I think that that's a way of the past. You don't have little kids going out with collecting money from sketchy people anymore, which is what I had to do. Go to knock on the door. Paper boy, time for collection. Safety was not a big issue for kids and for young workers, I think, at some point in Canada's history. Other things that I did when I was still a kid is, when I was 12 or 13, I used to go out to my uncle's ranch and do some hay farming with him. And that's, anybody who's done that, it's itchy work because all that hay dust gets under your skin and that. And I used to just look forward to running out and jumping in the lake after that. Anyways, I did that every summer for a while. Did some work on suppression crews and for forestry. I think 3 or 4 years before I was actually, before it was actually legal for me to do it. I think it started when I was 14. You're supposed to be 18 at least. So that was from my early life, just doing all sorts of odds and sods. I went to what's now called Thompson River University, but back then it was called the Caribou College, to do my first 2 years of university, of which it took me 3 years. Because the first 2 years I was planning on going into economics. But I had, like a lot of kids my age back then, I was, I think, 19, finishing off my second year of college, and I looked up what it would take to get into economics. I was married and had one child already and another one on the way, which is very typical. On average, at least 25% of Indigenous people in my generation anyways had kids by the time they were 21. So I was just a typical kid, Indigenous kid back then. So I realized that I would need at least a master's degree, and I thought that's going to take too long to get that done. So I switched out of economics and went to the computer science. That was probably a smart decision to make because although it was a slightly harder program that I went into, it meant that there was more opportunities when I got out of university. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot of opportunities for people who wanted to get into programmer analyst or programming positions, way more than there is now. And there was more of a career path for it, so it was a good thing to do. So looking back on it, my decision to switch out of economics, although I really loved economics, it was probably a really good one. Now, what was my experience working as a computer programmer once I got out? Well, I worked for some Indian bands in Merritt for a while, for about a year. But after that, I went out to Calgary, Alberta, and worked in data processing services division in the city of Calgary. And when I did that, there was one other person there. There was Beverly Grey Eyes was the only other person working as a computer programmer in this large data processing services division. I think there might have been 200-300 programmers in there, and the two of us were the only ones. So less than 1% of the computer programmers working there were Indigenous, just myself and Beverly. And when I moved, so people looked at me and they thought I was either a really tall Filipino, or I was Samoan, or I was anything but Indigenous, because Indigenous people don't do computer programming. Indigenous people don't do anything that's math or science oriented. And so I went through my early career doing these things, and everybody looking at me wondering, what the hell was I? I remember I was working in the Sheffield Geophysical Limited, and this white South African guy asked me, "What's your background?" I said, "I'm North American Indian," because that was one of the standard types of responses to me. And he was just beside himself. he was working with a red Indian. The next day he said, oh, guess what? I phoned my dad up last night and I told him that I was working with a red Indian. And I said, good for you. Anyways, that's how out there it was. You know, like one of the questions was, did I work in communities that had a lot of interface with Indigenous people? No. I was working out in an industry where there weren't a lot of Indigenous people. And when that, back in '86, when the whole oil industry fell apart in Alberta, I got laid off with another 50,000 professional people, engineers, computer programmers, technicians, and there were about 50,000 of us that got laid off that 1 year. And after that, I went back to BC and I started working on sort of small systems consulting for Indian bands and Native academic or educational institutes. And so I did that for a while. And that was totally involved with Indigenous communities and Indigenous kids. So that was a good thing to do, good part of my life there. But I guess what I wanted to say, in my chosen career, which was computer programming, I was such an outlier that nobody thought I was Indigenous. I was anything but. I had a Filipino girlfriend, and her friends would come over and start talking to me in their language. And I'd say, hey, wait a second, I'm not Filipino. And they'd stop and look at me. We thought you were just a tall Filipino. When I was at UBC, there was a Chinese girl in one of my third year classes. And she said that she thought I was Northern Chinese because I was tall. She thought I was from Northern China because back then I was a little taller than I am now. I was a little over 6 foot. But aging takes away your height sometimes. I'm only 5'11" now. Anyways, I better pass it on, otherwise I'll just keep on talking forever.
Thank you very much. I'm Brian George, and I'd like to thank Dr. Clinton, Dr. Hu, and my brother Gary for inviting me. Of course, Jackie Gonzalez, McDonald's, nice to see Sam and Kim. I started working quite young. I worked on the farm, got tailgate during the summers, that sort of thing. And then I tried out for an electrical apprentice, electrician. That didn't work out. And, you know, I got in a car accident, be crazy, and guess what? I was able to get through that. But I worked on CN, at the CN too, and I worked at a lumber mill. And it's interesting, you know, yourselves and labor, you know, BC is known as, you know, like it's very polarized between, well, at one time it was really between, so you could call it socialists and also the free enterprise. And so the unions were quite active in BC. And so it's interesting, I was part of a union and I got bypassed a lot. And that's why I walked off the job in Stewards. I mean, I said, this is crazy. Then I moved to Calgary and I did a year and a half plumbing apprenticeship. I did that in about 7 months. And I worked in Sparwood. Guess what? There was coal mines there. Unions, right? Very strong unions. And so then the economy went in a tank, and so then I moved to Vancouver. I went back to college. And boy, I didn't pay the price for the messing around I did in high school. I had to upgrade in English and math and some biology, that sort of thing. and had to take a second language to get in the UBC, because I didn't recognize Indigenous language, so I took French, right? And so during the summer, I'd get employment with at that time it was called Canada Employment Immigration Center, right? And I was a clerk for the summer, and this is something I really want. I looked at the breadth of experience in the place I worked at. You had teachers, you had accountants, you had policemen that were part of investigations for insurance fraud, right? But I really wasn't into given union because I was doing summer employment. And then I went to, at one point I worked with, just after I graduated, I went back to school. Of course, I graduated at UBC with a degree in political science. And in one of my public policy classes, they talked about, well, what our backgrounds were. And they said, the professor strongly recommended you get economics. And asked the people to raise their hands. And there's only 3 of us that raised their hands that didn't have economics for public policy. So my focus is on history. So I took history of BC, and that's why I got some it was pretty interesting to learn about BC and the politics of BC and just the whole thing about labor force. After university, I got a job 1 year with the officer that gets out with so up in hereditary chiefs during a court case. The court case on Aboriginal title and rights. So that was really the only time that there was any connection with culture during my previous work experience. Then it was only a term position, so I applied to the Public Service Commission, and I had to do a test, right? I had to do a writing test. And so this is my employment with my people that's coming down, winding down. I got a call. They wanted to interview me. Government Canada, Indian and Northern Affairs Canada. So I did the exam and I got the job. So I'll just give you just overview. I worked in education programs. I worked as a funding services officer. I worked in economic development. I actually worked in education. Also what they call Aboriginal workforce participation, which was dealing with labor demand, that sort of thing. Unions, unions. So I became, of course, as a public servant, I was part of the Public Service Alliance of Canada, and for my category, it's what's called program management. And through there, was there any connection with culture? Well, there's connection with employment and equity, which I imagine you'll be touching on part of your labor studies about recruitment, retention, and advancement of different categories of First Nation, or you could call the Aboriginal people, disabled women, and visible minorities. And so take that in the workplace. It was a challenge at the best of times, right? So I retired about 3.5 years ago, 3 years ago now, and I took a writing course here in SFU, creative nonfiction writing. And that's out of that I've learned so much about my background, about my grandfather. I had to work doing rail ties or providing service at Grand Trunk Railroad up northern BC in the early 1900s. Then my uncle, who's making ties, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, they made ties and they hired Aboriginal people from all over the place. We worked in the tie camps. And I think in the 50s, they changed the way ties were to be made, and guess what? Our people went by ways. That would be an interesting study in and of itself. So my connection with culture, like working with Indigenous Services Canada, which in the end that's what it was. So you have to bear in mind there are 202 First Nations in BC, 26 tribal councils. And 7 of the 11 language groups are here in BC. 7 of the language groups in Canada are here in BC. So the linguistic makeup is quite broad. And you look at Musqueam, you look at Squamish, right? Even look at Cowichan. There's some similarities, but there's big differences. Tim's country, same thing, right? It's in the Wet'suwet'en carrier language groups, there's about 6 or 7 different dialects. So that's how complicated it is. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Sam.
Koicha. It's in Akitsnicham. One of my relatives, he's a linguist and he's fluent in our spoken Sneecham. It's Brian's brother-in-law, Peter. And we were sitting at a cultural event, and Peter came sat with me, and he said, when you get up and speak, you say, it's a Sneecham. It means I only have a few words to share. And he said, you talk for an hour. I said, oh, thank you. So, it's a Sneecham, Aspa, Kanaya, Ents, Secwépemc, Sam Seaward, Queen Snow. Yachlam, Polastanat, Ten of Touch. Tina Chen Kla, Sla'a, Homostin. Ens Squamish, Xinying Hu. Sunspollens, Quinn Switchnomia, Tama, Quetzi, West Timatai. I said I'm going to share a few words in my language. My name is Secwépemc, and my name is Sam Seaward. And I come from the villages of Sla'an and Homostin. And I'm Squamish and Nanaimo. It's an honor to be here today to share a few words, part of my life. Part of my work to where I'm at today, I'm filming a documentary of my life called Growing Up Stelmoch. Stelmoch in our language means human being. So what my story is, we were here before the concept of Indian. So we're Stelmoch, and then my dad was from Nanaimo, and they say Squamoch, Mistimoch. So that's the story I'm sharing. I walk in 2 worlds. I have my Stelmoch world, and I have my mainstream world. So that's my story. I'm sharing. We're filming right now at the moment. But I think all the work I do is all a part of our culture. My first job, I acted in a TV movie. I was 12 years old. I went to day school, St. Paul's Indian Day School, for 7 years. And in grade 7, I was picked to act in a TV movie called Sister Balanica. I was based on residential school. So that was my first job in acting. And when I was 16, I was in high school. My first job was landscaping. And there's no internet or anything. We'd go to the unemployment office, and there'd be cardboard pinned up on the walls. And you go take it off the wall, and you bring it to the desk, and they say, we might call you tomorrow. And I got a call. So in 1972, I was making $2 an hour doing landscaping. And that was my first real experience of labor. It was hard at 16 years old. So after that, I went to BCIT for carpentry. I'm a Red Seal carpenter, and I contracted, built residential homes for 30 years for our Squamish Nation. And then I worked in the office as a housing manager for 10 years. And that's the only job I'm retired from now is carpentry. I'm 70 years old now, but I'm still busy. Like I said, I'm an actor. I do movies, TV, theater. I have a movie out right now on Prime Video called Catch the Fair One. And it's based on, I say, missing and murdered Indigenous women. So I did that. We filmed in Buffalo, New York. That was a good experience, I guess, put it that way. I've been in lacrosse. I'm still coaching lacrosse. I've been involved in lacrosse for 65 years. Played the World Championship in 1980. I was 24 years old. And we came second in the world. Played on an all-star all-native team. We had one practice. We played second. And I won Canadian Championship with our North Indians in 1985. So, but I'm still involved. I still coach, do clinics. And I'm a master wool weaver. I brought some samples here so everybody could have a look. That's how I met Zin on Cheltenham, Squamish territory, on Gambier Island. So I go to Gambier, I teach wool weaving, lacrosse, and I've done acting with high school students, which is a lot of fun. But talking about culture and that, and like when I was in high school, my dad was RCMP. He was the first Indigenous constable in BC. And my mom passed away and my dad moved to a different area of the reserve. But Dad would come and pick me up and drive me to school, high school. And I'd have to sit in the back seat of the police car. And he'd get out, let me out every day. And everybody would see me getting out of the car. And back then, there's guys selling weed at school, and you know, one day I got out, and these three guys, they waited for me at the door, and they said, "What did you tell the police?" I said, "I didn't tell them anything." I said, "That's my dad." And so I told them anything, he'd have you already, so. And then they just left me alone after that. But we talk about racism. We still face a lot of racism. Like I said, my dad would drive me around. He knew all these different people for work, so Dad would take me out for jobs. I had shoulder-length hair in the 70s. And everywhere we went, they said, "You have to cut your hair." And I said, "I'm not cutting my hair for you. Thank you." So that's how it was back in our time. Yeah, hair like yours. That's right. That's how we were. And we said, "We're not cutting it. Just just because you want us to look like something." I said, "No, thank you." But we're still filming. Like I said, I'm filming some carpentry, touching on the acting, theater, TV movies, and we're currently writing a play right now. I work with Presentation House Theater in North Vancouver. And my granddaughter Hannah, she's an actor, writer, and she wrote the first half of our play when she was 13. It's called As the Reds Turns. So I asked Hannah to write a story. I said, my dog passed away and everybody comes to my house. So that's our the play. And we have some of our culture, our native humor, some of our language, and family dynamics. And Hannah's my granddaughter, and Gabe George is my cousin. So that's what we're working on. And that's where I'm at today. Tama Kwetsi, Kwetsi Tamatay.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. In my language, we say Snikalia, Snikalia Denise. We thank you, your judgment, basically, and enough for your words. And a gathering like this is called Deninias. So as Timothy mentioned, I'm learning to speak my language. So we'll keep going with the second question. You might have already touched on some of this stuff. I'm not sure if we should just keep it going. So question number 2, looking back, what shape the career path you took? Were there social, economic, cultural, and family factors that played a role? So, like I said, they might have touched on them already, but please, and just so people know, your snacks and refreshments out in the hallway, please go help yourself. There's fresh coffee and cold water, so please help yourself.
Thanks, Gary. Looking back, okay, to continue, I was working as a small systems consultant and doing some computer training and that. So I was working at the Anauken Center in Penticton. I don't know, this must have been 1989 or so. And some of the experiences I had is training people from Indian reserves on computers. It was kind of interesting. One of the groups had my mother in it. And if you ever have to teach your mom something, don't. That's all I can say. But she was curious, always curious, because sometimes the older generation doesn't know about computers and that. So when I told her, when I first started going to university, when I switched over to computer science, she had no idea what I was talking about. Nobody in my family did, so I went off and did it. But I didn't realize that they had no clue what I was doing. Just wandering around doing these things, and my parents like, I don't know what he does. Something to do with computers. Anyways, I was working down in the Anauken Center, and working for Thetis Books and for Anauken Center, that were based in the same building. And I ran into one of my relatives, Glenn Douglas. And Glenn was, I guess for want of a better word, like we don't use the term elder, but that seems to be what people kind of understand. So he was one of the elders that was working there. He would have been probably in his 60s at that time. So he's younger than I am now, but he was older than me at that point. So, and he was an interesting fellow. He confided in me that he was the most traumatized soldier ever treated by the U.S. Army vets, the veteran hospital in the States. So he was a model soldier. He survived terrible wars, Second World War, Korean War, Vietnamese War, and special forces that did things that he couldn't talk about in North America and South America. In any case, I ran into my relative. The reason I recognized him as a relative is that he sounded so much like my Uncle Ernie Phillips that I thought, I heard him in the other room and I went and looked for him and no Ernie there. And then I just waited for somebody to talk and he started talking and I said, oh my God, he's got to be a relative. And so we struck up a conversation. We became very good friends. He became like a mentor to me for Okanagan philosophies and Okanagan spiritual practices. My first trip to the sweat lodge was with him. And so that started my journey back into getting in touch with Indigenous culture. I was always interested in my language, and the Secwépemc language, which is the Okanagan language, is about 30% the same. It's like maybe French and Portuguese or something like that. You know, you can get some of the gist of what's being said, but you can't get the whole thing. So I got to pick up a little more in Secwépemc at that point in time. Anyways, to bring it forward a few years, I was working down here. For a short time, I was working in the same organization as Brian. I was working as a computer programmer, and then I did some other things too. And Glenn called me up and said, they've offered me a position as the institutional elder for the Institute of Indigenous Government. I said, so I need a place to stay. So I said, well, when you coming? We'll get a bed ready for you. So he came down and we spent he spent about 3 or 4 years living with me, which was great. And I got some idea of what an institutional elder meant in terms of the context of the Institute of Indigenous Government, which later morphed into Nicola Valley Institute of Technology. And so Glenn was one of my primary sources for learning about plateau culture and language, as well as my parents. So my parents and Glenn were very instrumental in my understanding of the roots of my language and the roots of my culture. And I'm greatly indebted to my late dad and my late Uncle Glenn. And I'm really happy that my mother's still alive, and so I get a chance to visit with her, and I'm just thankful that they really helped me be formative, even if it was later in life, late 20s, early 30s. They helped formulate my cultural background. And they were also really big supporters of me. And when Glenn was working at the Institute of Indigenous Studies, there was a position that came up, and so he said, why don't you apply for it? So I started working there, and I started vectoring into working in colleges and universities at that point in time. And so I worked with them, and I started doing my master's in distance and distributed education at that time. So that was sort of my career into becoming sort of a support person within the college system. One of the next things I did is I worked because I have a background in science too, I got a job at UBC for 10 years as the First Nations coordinator in the Faculty of Science and Faculty of Land and Food Systems. And so that was also very formative in my career. So my parents, Glenn Douglas, some other people in my life were very instrumental in helping me formulate my life. And I just want to add that getting in touch with other cultures like the Sundance culture and that sort of thing was really important to me too. Getting involved with people that knew about Cree and Lakota cultures was really important. Just because these were the people in my life and they helped help me in my formative years. You each took.
Thank you. So, looking back, I was in college and I took a sociology course. And we talk about status, social status, right? Economic status. So here I am. My professor asked me, well, what about you? I said, oh, I'm a non-status Indian. That's your call. So some of you may not know what's different between status and non-status. Indian Act, you lose your status and become a non-status Indian. So I was able to look at that and say, okay, well, I don't have status. And how was I treated in my community? Like, know that well, you do not belong here. Yet on the other side, the mainstream community says you don't belong here either. So it's like it's straddling both worlds. Straddling both worlds. So it's interesting. So from that, I was able to, I became really acutely aware of the socioeconomic status of Indigenous people. And from there, I was able to move forward. And so I'm a big statistics guy. I really like data, right? So I pulled a bunch of data from Stats Canada on Indigenous people, right? And how much money our government spends on Indigenous people. I have that too. So yes, socially, there was always the differences, right? So that played a big role in how I am today. And economically, same thing. Culture, That's an interesting question. So, union, workplace, that's a culture. There's culture there, right? And how do we deal with some of those cultural elements moving forward, right? In terms of understanding differences. So, family factors, this is interesting. I'll just share with you a story about my background in terms of status. In the 1920s, my uncles were about, I think about 6 and 8 years old. The Indian agent took the kids away from my grandfather to attend residential school, 200 kilometers away. They ran away twice in the wilderness, and they survived. They survived. So as out of that experience, I believe we're still trying to figure that out. But my grandfather, my grandmother says, okay, we're gonna give up our status so our kids don't have to attend residential school. So my father, they all attended, my aunts and uncles, most of them attended public schools. And this is in the 30s. And I have also information on that. So that kind of drove us to who we are today. Right. I'll pass over to Sam.
Or yes, everything I do in my life is I've been influenced by my family. I'm a red seal carpenter. My grandfather was a carpenter, canoe builder, and he worked with wood. I'm an actor, writer, and my dad was an actor, and my mom was a writer. With lacrosse, that's a big part of our culture. My mom and dad were part of our North Indians Minor Lacrosse Association. And I'm a master wool weaver, comes from a sister-in-law and brother-in-law. And with language and culture, everything comes from my family. Some of our culture, which I come from, we have to be born into it to actually practice some of our culture. So yeah, Mount Quincy.
Growing up, did you notice any differences in what was expected of sons versus daughters when it came to work or careers?
In my family, not really. I want to say that, I was kind of a wild kid when I was in my early teens. And I think my mother just wanted me to survive. And I think my dad, he basically just told me, whatever you do, get your grade 12. After that, you can do anything. And so that stuck in my mind. I'm gonna get my grade 12. Do a little bit of studying in between all my partying. And so that was my own experience. And then when I got to college, regional college, I gave my head a shake, and I did fairly well in that, considering how little attention I paid in high school. But I look back at it, and with myself and my brother Art, who's next to me, I think my parents just wanted us to survive till we were 21, and then, wash their hands of us. So I ended up going to university. My brother Art did too, but not until much later in life. brother Ken was a little slow. He started university at 18, but he didn't actually finish it till he was about 28, so. And that's neither here nor there, but one of my sisters had a 2-year arts diploma from Caribou College. A brother and a sister, another brother, I have 8 siblings, so a brother and a sister became educators like my dad. My dad was one of the first teachers, Indigenous teachers in BC. And two of my siblings became teachers. Another one did a degree in criminology. Another one did a degree, I think, in political science. A sister did. So as you can see, I think all but one of us has a university degree, at least one university degree. And that one has a 2-year diploma in arts from Caribou College. So, was there any differentiation? No, I mean, I think that my siblings would have been supported whatever they took. And my parents had no idea what computer science was all about, so they just said, huh? Well, as long as he's at university doing something. So that was my experience in my home.
My experience at home is like almost very defined, female versus male. But my mother, I tell you, she actually started going to work to support her family. Like she picked potatoes out on a farm, and she worked in a nursery, like a tree nursery. And so, of course, with that, you know, like being the eldest in the family, I had to do all the cooking and cleaning and looking after my siblings. So over a period of time, sorry, I found that when I went back to university and then started working at the government in Canada, this is interesting, collective bargaining. So I took parental leave as a dad. My wife went to China. And so I was having to look out my infant daughter. Like she just stayed and she cried for 3 hours. I was sitting there, okay, finally I said, listen, this is all you're gonna get. I showed her the bottom and she stopped crying. And so my wife was gone for 2 weeks, or about 2 weeks, that I was doing all the chores. I believe that experience made me a better dad, made me a better father. And I believe that's what collective bargaining, it creates change. It almost creates cultural change within the family, right? You know, in my family, I tell you, like my siblings, each one of us has some post-secondary degree of some sort. My sister's a historian, another sister's a registered nurse, brother is a chef, NCO chef with the Peary's, has a master's of education. My brother Craig has a master's in business administration. So each work for what we put a lot of effort into it. So now my daughter she's going to UBC, or she's having trouble with get her back on stream. My son is, he's going to UBC in forestry, and my eldest son is a bartender, and top bartender, bartending one of the top restaurants is on too, right? Joe Forte's, that's so that fish house in Stanley Park. So I feel that whole thing about the man and women, like with desertus and the pigeons, it's not like what it used to be. And I hope for a lot more change.
Oswald. Yeah, talking about family support. to me, I feel we're no different than a lot of other different cultures. We're all still human beings, and we're all the same. And I've always had my family's support in whatever I've done. And through all the work I do, I get to meet a lot of people. When I go to Cheltenham, we work with educators, Jackie and I, and I've made my choices in life and what I wanted to do, my kind of work, and I do all this different work I do. And I was in Cheltenham in a room like this, a dining room, and I was sitting down the end by myself, and this lady came down, and she said, "Are you Sam?" And I said, "Yeah." And she sat down, and she said her family moved from India, and her parents paid for her daughter, the grandparents paid for their granddaughter to go to UBC, she tells me. And then she said, she knew I was an actor. She said, "You're an actor?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "My son wants to be an actor, but my parents want him to go to UBC. And I told my parents no, and I told my son he can be an actor." I said, "Good, oh, that's awesome." So we always talk, she's breaking the cycle, the family cycle of what was happening with her family. She came over and her parents put her through school. So, and all of you are in school, you've chosen your path and what you want to do in your life. But with life, we have a lot of similarities. And I've been in sports all my life. I also do, we talk about family now, I do mentorship speaking for high school students going to college or university on athletic scholarships. And I share my journey in lacrosse, and I play basketball. They were my two main sports. But I also include all the jobs that I still do. And I always tell these young students, find something in your life that you're going to be happy to wake up to and go to work and be happy. You know, even if you find something now, you don't get stuck there. You can always move on. It's life. You move on. Find something you enjoy, you're happy to do, and get up and make a living at it. And I share that with these high school students. And after I talk, there's a question and answer. And one of the biggest questions they ask is, what would you do if you could go back and be 18 years old? I said, I'd listen. Listen to, in our culture, we listen. Somebody's sharing with you, you listen, you take it, and you say thank you. I said, you listen. I said, I'm older now, and now in lacrosse, all my coaches have passed on, all my mentors. So I can't go back and talk to them and ask them questions. So that's what we're taught in our culture with Jackie. You listen, somebody's sharing their life, sharing what they've learned in their life, what has worked in their life, and we're sharing. And when I talk in our culture, I'll share some words. I'm not saying, Brian, you have to do this. I'll share this with you, Brian. I'm not telling him he has to do that. And that's how I always talk in our culture, in our family. Family is a big part of our culture. Everything we do, everything we have comes from our culture. Democracy.
Right.
Thank you. You know, like listening to these gentlemen speak, I think about some of my own experiences. Like I remember my father, he used to say, because we grew up in a small single resource-based town, my first job, one of my first jobs was piling lumber. And he says, oh, you can do that, but think about doing something, specializing in something. And he actually said to become a doctor, a lawyer, or something like that. And so we, as my brother mentioned, we chased education. And I didn't even know what I was going to do. I could tell people, and this is straight from the bottom of my heart, 25 years ago, I had no idea I was going to be working at SFU. I just knew wanted to get something that said I was something in this world, and I decided to do it. So the next question, some of these questions they already touched on, but yeah, I just touched on it a bit. What kind of work were common for young people in your community when you were growing up? Like even that job, I know you're all some of you are students. Like I remember there's this thing called telemarketing. I used to telemarket. And sometimes I remember one time I was telemarketing when I was a student in Langara, and I got a $10 tip that one evening, and I went right to Burger King and I bought a burger and fries. It's just something I did. That's a part of my story. Anyways, Tim, what kind of work were common for young people in the community when you were growing up?
Well, I can tell you that it wasn't computer programming. A lot of the people that I remember when I was growing up ended up working in the sawmill or the pulp mill. A few of them went and worked as carpenters and that. It's, and yeah, mostly carpenters, I think. A few of them also went out and did logging. Logging was a big thing that people did back then. There's a few that went into mechanicking. But that's what I remember. And that maybe it's just the gang I hung out with, because all the European guys that I hung out with, they did the same sort of thing. A lot of them went to do lumber piling, work in sawmills, pulp mills, or as mechanics or carpenters. It wasn't until I got to college that I started meeting guys that were going into other fields.
Well, excuse me. It's interesting, these questions, a lot of them overlap. And so, I don't know if I'll talk about the kind of work I did when I was younger, because I can look at what you're doing as students. And they were studies, and you're probably interested, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So, back in the late 2010, up to 2010, there's all this talk about labor market demand, the labor market supply, the baby boomers are retiring, you see all these opportunities, right? And those opportunities are here now, right? No. So, interestingly, when I looked at some of the things that, like you always talk about, the opportunities for youth. So I looked at the Conference Board of Canada, a lot of green papers, as is Canada West Foundation, with some Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives. In these papers, they talk about using Indigenous youth. Yes, okay, so there's opportunities there. Yet when you look at the statistics, there's still some way to go to get some sort of level playing field. So that's me.
The question is, what kind of people have already touched on it, but I'll repeat the question. What kind of work were common for young people in your community when they're growing up?
What kind of work, has brought up.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we were in high school, our nation had student jobs working with, what do they call it, comm ops now, community ops, where we do building, fixing fences, cleaning up. Other people like to work in the office and help write letters. That's about all we had, like grass cutting. Just something to keep us busy. Yeah, come on, questions.
Thank you. In the interest of time, just for your information, Canada is winning 2-0. 44 minutes in. And we're going to actually do a question and answer for these gentlemen, because I have a feeling there would be, and because this is getting recorded, I'm encouraging you to use the mic, because get a question from anybody who might have a question out there.
Is that
Yeah.
Thank you. I know that you mentioned that workplace culture, union culture in that aspect. That's my question was, in the jobs that might have had some form of a union or like workplace representation, how did you find like your treatment or how members in the union or union leadership like treated your concerns or your?
Thank you for your question.
Can you paraphrase that question?
In the union,
Yeah, in any like jobs that might have had like might have had a union or forthcoming you guys, what extent did you find like or would they treat people like? Was your info like affected or was it often like what's like we experience positive or negative?
yeah, basically, how was your experience? How like do you feel that the union was fair towards you when you were in the workforce?
That's a really interesting question because unions, there's a quite a broad, broad representation in unions in terms of women, Indigenous people, and just everybody, disabled, that sort of thing. Was there fairness? Yes and no. Some of it was due to my own limitations. A lot of it was driven by collective bargaining. I'll share this story. It was really interesting because I was assaulted in 2017. I was out for a coffee break. So I believe this is structural. So when you look at the collective bargaining agreement, it says that you're entitled to one coffee break for 10 minutes, right? That's something along 10 or 15 minutes. So this is interesting. Someone's assaulted by one coffee break. So I went through the grievance process, and I went through the criminal process, and I lost. Every step of the way, I lost. So this is an issue was structural because they said I had to be doing something, and I think this is still an outstanding issue. If you're on a coffee break in the morning and the afternoon, you have to be doing something employment related. And so I fought that right from to the appeal process. At the end, I lost. WorkSafe BC. They said I wasn't eligible. I said, well, that in order, and they said if I was pursued further, I'd have to take it on my own dime, and I wasn't about to lose anymore, so I had to just leave it. So there is adequate representation, whether it's fair or not. Like in my workplace, and in the Indigenous Service Canada, like there's this thing about I guess you can call it every region they have a percentage that you have to go to for, say, senior management. That's a ceiling. I think you'd agree with that. That's a ceiling. So it's almost like they went right up against that ceiling, 4% for Indigenous people. You know, as for myself, I don't really can manage. I have a hard time managing people and human resources, so I'm not sure if that answered your question, did it?
That answers the question, thank you.
We have another question over here.
Hi, my name is Sam. Thank you for coming to speak to us today. I have 2 questions for the gentleman at the end. You mentioned that your dad worked in the RCMP, and I find that it's very interesting that your parents influenced the sort of like direction you went with like your work. But you mentioned your dad was in the RCMP, and the RCMP can be understood as like an extension of the Canadian state, which has historically sadly been very imperialist and harmful towards Indigenous communities. I wonder if there's any insights you can offer us about your dad working in the RCMP. That's my first question. And then my second question would be the fact that you said you grew up in a very creative household. Your mother was a writer, and I wonder why you chose to go into doing a trade. I know you mentioned your grandfather was made canoes, but that's very different from like working in carpentry. I'm just very curious as to why you chose to do a trade instead of like, maybe doing film. Correctly do now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, my dad, he was a longshoreman, and he hurt his back. And at that time, my mom was very sick, and so that was a tough time. Dad had back surgery, and then once he recovered, he went to Saskatchewan for a few months for the RCMP training. And before that, he was a peacekeeper with our Squamish Nation. So it was a very tough job dealing with our own people, our membership, going out on calls, at night. My dad, he seemed to enjoy that kind of work, so he went and got the training for RCMP, and that was a tough time. Also with our membership, because Dad lived on res, he lived where we lived, and people would be swearing at him or shooting at his home, his front door with pellet guns or BB guns, when he first started. And then I think after a while, some of the people were getting used to seeing Dad as working with the RCMP, because he was working to help us. He wasn't, against us. He was there for us. That's the way I saw it. I was a teenager, and I saw that how Dad was treated. The way people talked to him, and that was more face to face. There was no social media back then, so it's right in your face. Either people are right at him. So that's what Dad dealt with, and he shared some of his work with me. His undercover work. He'd grow up shoulder-length hair, and he'd get sent out undercover. And he did that kind of work. Just kind of dangerous, but Dad seemed to enjoy it. And Dad he had a good sense of humor. In his RCMP, he was in North Vancouver, where we grew up, and I don't know if you've heard of Leonard Pelche, was just released from jail. He's in South Dakota, and they had a shootout with FBI, and unfortunately, one of the FBI agents was shot and killed. And they went to court, even though the bullet they took from, or bullets from the FBI agent were government issued, Leonard Peltier still got the blame, and he went to jail for it. So this is when Dad was RCMP and he was undercover, and North Vancouver got a new police chief, and Dad had keys or whatever. He got into the chief's office upstairs, and the chief didn't know Dad. Dad sat across from him, and Dad said, "I'm taking over this building for Leonard Peltier. You have to free him." And chief hit the button, everything went lockdown. There's about 20 SWAT units. They came running up. They opened the door and they had the guns up, and my dad's sitting there in long hair and sitting in front of the chief. He's all calm. And the lieutenant or somebody said, "Oh, Teddy, you can't do that." My dad just laughed and walked out. I said, "What happened?" He said, "I got in trouble, but that was okay." But he was just, that was his way of making a point that what happened to Leonard Peltier was wrong, and he's telling the police chief that, and so, yeah. And for carpentry, after I did landscaping, my grandfather was probably about my age now, and he would still do carpentry work. So we're doing decks and stairs and handrail, and I didn't mind doing it. I was a young man, so it wasn't strenuous, wasn't too hard on the body. So that's how I got into carpentry and BCIT. And I wanted to be in school. It was easier for me. I was an athlete. I played lacrosse at a high level, and I played basketball at a high level. So to me, I felt that if I could get an education, do something I wanted to do, and I could still play the sports that I loved and be successful. So that's how I went into carpentry. But in school, I kind of moved away from school after a couple of years, and I worked at a cement plant. We used to do the pre-stress for all the malls. We used to do the floors and the walls for all the malls and the big buildings. So I did that for probably about 5 years. About 3 years was hard labor, and I drove forklift for 2 years. And then I kept playing sports. And one of my friends went back to school. He said he's going to say, "I'll go with you." I went back to BCIT. And then I wrote for my test based on experience. You need 5 years experience, so I needed the hours. And I asked my foreman, he wrote up my hours for me, and I passed the test in Red Seal carpenter, and I started contracting for our Squamish Nation, building residential homes. And yeah, that's the only thing I retired from now. I'm all busted up from lacrosse, so I don't want to be doing carpentry in the heat or in the cold weather. So I do all this other stuff, which is easier on the body. Acting is a totally different job. You get to meet a lot of people, a lot of nice people. With my documentary right now, we're working on funding, so I'm getting to meet a lot of people on the other side of the camera. It's a totally different world. We're working with corporate funders, so yeah, it's a totally different for me. Usually in front of the camera or writing. Now I'm in the business part of it, and I've been writing my life story since 2008, and with my documentary, we haven't even touched on my writing, what I've been writing, my book and that. So I'm hoping to maybe my producer for my documentary is a writer, so he can write it for a movie. I'm hoping to turn it into a movie, and yeah, that's where I'm at with no more carpentry. Thank you.
Thank you so much. we could keep this going for a long time. Oh, sorry, we got a question back there.
Hello, my name is Rosa. Thank you guys for your time today. I had a question for both of you in terms of just like your high school years and like as you guys were growing up and even in like the jobs that you guys are doing now. Do you see any major differences with like gender, like between women and men, or like was there more stay-at-home women then versus now, and like how like gender differences and like how people were treated?
Difference.
Which two? Does it matter?
For everyone.
Gender differences, high school from when you guys are going to high school compared to today.
I think that with my family, there wasn't a lot of difference. When it came to other families, probably some difference. I think that men were sort of seen as more into trades and maybe technical areas, like engineering or things like that, electricians, carpenters, and women maybe more for nursing and that sort of thing, teaching. Yeah, it's hard to say. I think that typically, if you take a look at what was happening in the late 60s and early 70s, there's certainly some differences now, society-wise, but in terms of being Indigenous, I think one of the things that's happened in the Indigenous communities is that when I was growing up, it was in my communities, it was pretty much a 50-50 split in terms of the number of Indigenous men and Indigenous women that were going out and getting university education. And in terms of other types of trades and that, there was some split up, like in terms of more technical and Red Seal kind of things for men, although some women were doing that. And more things like, nail technicians or beauticians and that sort of, nurses, that sort of thing, teaching for women. I think though what's happened since then is that in my community, the communities where I'm from, it's still probably closer to parity in terms of men and women, in terms of the types of careers that people go into. But what I noticed when I was at the University of British Columbia and when I was working, especially when I was working there, and when I was started working at the time at Fraser University, that there seems to be a lot more Indigenous women that are going to university than men. That doesn't sort of reflect itself in the Kamloops or Chase communities where I'm from, but that certainly reflects itself with the majority of Indigenous communities out there. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Just touch briefly on this, like my niece, it's a welder. So that shows you just a change in the workforce, right? Also, my cousin's a plumber. So there's a change in attitude, right? That's really it's almost like modernized and the thinking, right? Getting into a new way of thinking and doing things. From my standpoint, my best managers were women, all women. During my career, like 75% of the women, and they're the best. I mean, never was as a man. But anyways, I hope that answered the question. I think there's still a lot more work to do. You look at some of the statistics, then Tim's right. There's a lot more women going into, from a religious standpoint, going into university than there are men. that's a good thing. But how to get the rest of our community up to another level to be a part of Main Street is probably the biggest challenge yet.
Yeah, we're all different. We all have different experiences in high school, and mine. There's like about 40 of us my age. Not all from Squamish. We're Seashell, Fall River, Secwépemc. There was about 40 of us guys about the same age, and there's about 20 young ladies. So we'd all sit together, and like I said, I touched on racism a bit, and there's about 8 students transferred from India that came in, and I always remember that. And I had a friend, his name is Hart. He came from India, and they were at school for about a week, and we're all sitting in the caf, and he came with me with his friends. He said, "Sam, can we sit with you?" I said, "Yeah, come on in," and everybody moved, and he sat down. I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Those guys are picking on us." I said, "Oh, okay." And out of all our friends, there's always some guys that'll fight. I wasn't a fighter, but I had friends that would fight. And they heard, and they came over, and they said, "Hart, who is it?" And these were my teammates. Could have been football, basketball. And they went over and told me, you leave them alone. They're new to this country, you leave them alone. They're already having a tough time. And they left them alone. I always remember that. Also, probably the way the teachers talked. My PE teacher knew I played lacrosse, and in high school we had an all-native soccer team and an all-native lacrosse team. And just me and one of my friends played basketball. So we knew all these other students, athletes, and to me, I think to me that was a time, you watch these movies, like say The Outsiders, there's the greasers and the athletes and soccer. So we were going through that transition where we dressed, the way we dressed, they called us greasers, and then we had the jocks who I played with too, and they dressed different. They just, the way we're treated just because of the way we looked. So I always remember that. And same with the teacher, Mr. Henderson, our PE teacher. He was a football coach, and you probably couldn't say it today. He'd always say Indians against white boys, and he'd say, "All right, we're playing football against the football team. It'd be a rough game. Soccer, we're Indians against white boys." He always said that. Everything. And I haven't heard anything like that from my nephews or relatives in high school. I don't think they'd be able to talk like that today. And I even had the wrestling coach wanted to fight me because I wouldn't. I forget what we're doing, and they're raising money to pay for the vans to take the athletes to the games. I said, "Well, I don't ride in the van, I take my car." And so he wanted to fight me. So I think there's big differences from when we're in high school to compared to today. We still have our nephews and nieces who excel in sports, or they excel in academics. So I hear, but there's a difference for me when I'm talking, what I experienced anyways. And I had an awesome counselor. He was my basketball coach also, so I shared my life with him. He was awesome. He's an awesome man. I was comfortable with him. So, and I don't hear that about even my granddaughters. I said, "You talk to your counselor?" Like, I know. So well, but I was very lucky. I had an awesome man took care of me in high school. Democracy.
Really like to keep this going, but we have to end the day. And gonna just quickly say, like I said, I'm learning my language. When I say Dakazet, that refers to all the young people, all the young learners. When we say Zin Hanzu, Snakalia, Zine, Hanzu, Skudachge, Timothy, Brian, and Sam. Denise. Thank you very much for teaching us today. And even for myself, it brought up a lot of memories for me. Like that last question, like what we heard in high school, you'd never hear today. Some of the stuff. And I actually witnessed one of my friends get beat up by the PE teacher. And when I brought it up in my teacher education, nobody believed me. They were like, what, really? I actually witnessed the PE teacher beat up an AIF kid. And literally dragged him across the floor out the door. And the people in the class decided not to believe that. They were just, yeah, okay, whatever. So that's part of what we face today. Some of the stuff that we went through, people either don't want to believe it or they just don't believe it. So I'm going to pass it over to Zine. And guess what? In my language, Zine means day.
Yeah. Thank you. Time to close. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your stories, good or bad. And then, let's give them a round of applause. Before we close today's event, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our elder Jackie, our facilitator Gary, our invited speakers Tim, Brian, and Sam, to our labor studies students and all participants. Everyone who helped make this Indigenous Work Experience series possible. I would also like to acknowledge and thank our co-sponsors, the Indigenous Cultural Awareness Training and Professional Development Grant, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, and the Labor Studies Program at Fraser University, and for their generous support. I also thank the Office for Indigenous Peoples to share this space with us, to open the space to us. And as we celebrate National Indigenous History Month, we are reminded of the importance of learning about Indigenous histories, cultures, and contemporary experiences. I hope today's event inspires us to continue seeking out Indigenous perspectives, deepen our understanding, and reflect on how each of us can contribute to meaningful reconciliation in our classrooms, our workplaces, and communities. This is the first event in our Indigenous Work Experience series, and we look forward to bring you more conversation and learning opportunities in the near future. So please stay tuned for our future events. And thank you again for joining us. I wish you all a meaningful National Indigenous History Month and a wonderful soccer celebration evening. You are welcome to stay here and to look at the beautiful arts Sam brought here. And if our speakers have time to stay, and yes, please stay, ask more questions. Well, thank you, everyone.
I just wanted to quickly mention that today we sent out the Ultimate National Indigenous Day quiz. It's a virtual quiz, and you can win a coffee card. And that maybe Zine can forward it to the students. Mm-hmm. And it's designed to puzzle the best. Thank you. Thank you.